Officer Whitaker's furious voice echoed through the courthouse corridor as he dragged Elijah Carter toward a small hearing room. Interfering with the police investigation, he snarled, rattling off one trumped-up charge after another. A cluster of onlookers stared in disbelief, some whispering that the officer had finally gone too far. Elijah, wrists uncomfortably pinned, locked eyes with the crowd. Despite his predicament, there was an unshakable resolve in his gaze, a silent promise that he would not be broken by yet another display of unwarranted power. The tension crackled like a live wire, as though the walls themselves sensed that an explosive truth was about to be laid bare. No one, not even Officer Whitaker, realized just how epic this showdown would become. Sometime earlier, Elijah Carter was making his way toward the courthouse on a sweltering summer afternoon, sweat gathering on his brow under the intense sunlight. He had just finished an errand at the local pharmacy when he heard an elderly woman calling out for help near the parking lot behind a small grocery store. She was frantic, patting her pockets and peering under cars in a desperate search for her missing wallet. Elijah took one look at her trembling hands and decided he had to step in. He knelt down on the hot asphalt, scanning the ground, until he spotted a worn leather billfold partially hidden beneath a crumpled newspaper. The relief in the woman's eyes was immediate. She clutched the wallet to her chest like a lifeline. "You're a blessing," she murmured, her voice shaking with gratitude. Elijah simply smiled, assuring her that anyone else would have done the same. But deep down, he knew not everyone would. His parents had taught him from childhood to act with kindness, no matter the circumstances, even when the world wasn't so kind back. With that small good deed behind him, Elijah continued toward the courthouse, a towering structure of white columns and stone steps. It stood like a monument to justice, yet he couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. The older he got, the more it seemed that true justice was an uphill climb for people who looked like him. He was 60 years old now, with a lifetime of experiences that shaped his resolve. Halfway up the steps, Elijah noticed a commotion near the entrance. A tall, broad-shouldered police officer, his nameplate read Whitaker, was looming over a black teenager who could hardly meet his gaze. The officer was angrily accusing the teen of loitering, though this was a public building open to anyone. Whitaker's tone was laced with impatience, and Elijah suspected something far more insidious. Elijah's voice was calm as he intervened. "Excuse me, officer. Is there a problem?" The teen's hands shook slightly and Aja could see fear etched across the young man's face. Officer Whitaker sneered, clearly offended by the interruption. "Step aside, old man," he spat, his grip tightening on the teen's sleeve. "You people are always defending the wrong crowd." Elijah felt a slow burn in his chest, an anger born from decades of witnessing such blatant contempt, but he kept his composure. "He's not doing anything wrong," Elijah said, meeting the officer's icy stare. Whitaker scoffed loudly, turning back to the teen. In that moment, the young man seized the chance to slip away into a cluster of bystanders. Furious at losing his target, Whitaker pivoted and fixed his glare on Elijah instead. Without warning, the officer seized Elijah's arm in a vice-like grip. "You want to interfere? Fine, you can come inside and explain yourself to the court." Several onlookers gasped at the sudden aggression, some shouting protests, others seemingly too shocked to move. Elijah's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he looked at Whitaker calmly. "I have nothing to hide," he said, voice steady and low. Whitaker dragged him through the heavy courthouse doors, leaving the murmuring crowd behind. Elijah forced himself to breathe evenly, reminding himself that anger would only feed the prejudice he was facing. Deep inside, though, his frustration simmered. Why must this continue year after year, generation after generation? What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how this unfolded. Officer Whitaker stormed through the courthouse lobby, his heavy boots echoing off the marble floors. Elijah was right behind him, practically in tow, enduring the stares of curious onlookers and off-duty officers who seemed both puzzled and alarmed. A few recognized Whitaker's foul reputation. Some whispered among themselves about yet another scene he was stirring up. Others just watched in silence, not daring to step in. Elijah was ushered into a small hearing room. Though it wasn't packed, enough people had gathered to form a tense, expectant crowd. The officer wasted no time, launching into exaggerated charges, obstructing a police investigation, disturbing the peace, and even an outlandish attempted assault of an officer. Each charge fell from Whitaker's lips like a hammer blow, lacking any factual basis. With each new accusation, Elijah felt a cynical laugh threatening to escape. Attempted assault for speaking up against injustice. That's a new one, he thought bitterly. A bailiff stood by, eyebrows raised in disbelief. The court clerk, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes, shot Elijah a sympathetic glance. She seemed to recognize the absurdity of the situation, but her job was to record, not to judge. Meanwhile, Whitaker puffed himself up, delighted to have a captive audience. The storm of bigotry that poured out of him was so blatant, it nearly took Elijah's breath away. It was as if the officer reveled in asserting power over anyone he perceived as lesser, and in Whitaker's eyes, Elijah fit that category just fine. Still, Elijah maintained an air of calm dignity. He answered the clerk's procedural questions with concise respect. When asked if he had counsel, he merely stated he could represent himself if necessary. A ripple of surprise coursed through the room. People wondered if he was a lawyer. Yet Elijah said nothing more. He knew timing was everything. Judge Keller, an older man with thoughtful eyes and a measured demeanor, took his seat at the bench. He peered down at Whitaker, then at Elijah, and frowned. It was evident that the judge smelled something off about the cop's story, but the formalities required he proceed with caution. Officer Whitaker, Judge Keller began in a slow, deliberate tone. I'd like to hear precisely how Mr. Carter posed a threat. Whitaker proceeded to spin an exaggerated tale. In this twisted version of events, Elijah had rushed him and hindered an active investigation. Never mind that the so-called investigation involved harassing a random teenager on public step. The more Whitaker spoke, the more Elijah could feel tension mounting in the room. The officer's words dripped with condescension. Elijah caught a glimpse of a few spectators, some clearly outraged. One older woman shook her head in dismay while a younger man in a tailored suit looked ready to step in. Yet no one spoke up. Perhaps they were used to seeing men like Whitaker run roughshod over vulnerable people in this very building. Then came a sudden twist. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and a courthouse official rushed and holding a slim folder, expression urgent. Judge Keller paused. Is there something that can't wait? He asked, irritated by the interruption. The official whispered something to the judge, and a flicker of surprise crossed Keller's face. He cleared his throat. We will take a brief recess, he declared, tapping his gavel lightly. The court will reconvene in 15 minutes. The crowd erupted in whispers as people tried to guess what new information had just arrived. This is the moment you've been waiting for. Stay tuned to see how the hero put everyone in their place. When the hearing resumed, the tension felt thicker than ever. Whitaker stood by the prosecution's table, arms folded in defiance, clearly convinced he had the upper hand. Elijah took his place on the opposing side, hands clasped, posture upright. Judge Keller glanced from the file in front of him to Whitaker, then to Elijah. His voice was calm, yet resonant. Officer Whitaker, you've made serious accusations against Mr. Carter. I need you to confirm under oath you stand by every claim. Whitaker lifted his chin, eyes darting around the room. Absolutely, Your Honor, he declared, a smug grin creeping across his face as if the gavel was already won. Elijah observed the officer's false confidence with a mixture of disbelief and ironic amusement. Judge Keller nodded. I see. Then, in light of new information provided to this court, I believe Mr. Carter has a statement of his own. He turned his gaze on Elijah. Mr. Carter, you may proceed. Elijah drew a slow, measured breath. The entire room seemed to hinge on his words. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady yet edged with quiet conviction. There's been a misunderstanding of monumental proportions. I speak not only as a concerned citizen, but also in my official capacity. With that, Elijah reached into his coat and revealed a gold badge pinned discreetly inside. A low gasp rippled through the crowd. He let the moment linger, then spoke again, his tone unwavering. I'm the Chief Federal Prosecutor for this district and several others. My duties often involve overseeing civil rights cases, including those alleging abuses of power. The color drained from Whitaker's face so swiftly, it was almost comical. Judge Keller's expression remained calm, but there was the faintest arch of his brow, as if confirming something he had already suspected. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my goodness." Another murmured, "I knew there was something about him." Elijah continued, turning to face Whitaker. "You accused me of obstructing justice when, in fact, you were harassing an innocent teenager. I sought only to defend him from your baseless threats." His voice carried the composure of a seasoned legal mind, but there was no mistaking the deep undercurrent of anger. "This cannot be tolerated by me, by this court, or by any citizen who believes in the rule of law." Officer Whitaker, his bravado completely gone, stumbled over his words. I had no idea." He stammered, but found no sympathy in the faces around him. The silent condemnation was more powerful than any outburst could have been. Judge Keller cleared his throat. "Officer, your actions appear not only unprofessional, but potentially illegal. I am ordering an immediate review of your conduct. Mr. Carter, you have the court's apologies for any inconvenience." The judge's voice softened slightly, addressing Elijah with a modicum of respect. "All charges against you are, of course, dismissed." A wave of relief and validation washed over Elijah. He turned to the spectators, many of whom broke into quiet applause. Some nodded in respect, while others seemed stunned by the swift turnaround of events. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a moment that underscored a much larger truth about justice, race, and power. Whitaker stood there, stripped of his self-assurance. Behind him, murmurs circulated about a formal investigation, the possibility of disciplinary action, even termination. As the bailiff motioned for Whitaker to step away, the officer's shoulders slumped in defeat. Elijah caught one final glimpse of him before he was led out of the courtroom. A broken shell of the man who dragged him inside with such arrogance. Outside the courthouse, the same steps where the confrontation first began now felt different. The air was still thick and muggy, but a sense of triumph underlay the humidity. People approached Elijah, some to shake his hand, others to offer words of gratitude or admiration. The elderly woman he'd helped earlier appeared, giving him a small, encouraging nod as if to say, "See, doing good always matters." Elijah inhaled the warm air and gazed at the imposing columns, reflecting on how often these halls failed people who looked like him. But not this time. Today the truth had come out, swiftly and powerfully. It reminded him and everyone watching that justice, though it may stumble, can still stand tall when the right people hold it up.